sometimes it is presumed that because this sector of society is so famous for its strictness about certain aspects of keeping the Torah, that it must be that they know better than everyone how to keep all of the Torah. And on numerous scores, I would say that's certainly not necessarily true. So there may be great mitzvot where they're getting 10 out of 10 and hitting the high notes. But if we go across, all the way across the board, there is a critique from the standpoint of Torah that we could direct at any sector in Israeli society, and no less so at Haredi society, and say, all right, these are the things that are being made into idols, and these are the things that are falling by the wayside. We don't have time for that now, but in any case, it's a situation that is in need of repair, and people who are coming from the other side and saying, look, there's something outrageous about this, and we should make them serve in the army, because look, it just doesn't even make sense. They're getting all these benefits and they don't even serve, that kind of argument coming from the left. There's a grain of truth in it, or you can understand where people are coming from to some degree. However, with that being said, there's also something totally unfair about that way of making the argument. And that's because Haredim are by no means the only sector of society that derives benefit from the distribution of tax funds. This is a socialist society that half a century ago was on the brink of choosing to become a communist society. And there's a lot of legacy in how the society is run from that history. So there's all sorts of different ways you can get a sal, a basket of benefits, where the state is handing out tax money that it's collected to people who fit into this group or that group or that group. And to look at Haredim and act as though they're the only interest group in society that has figured out how to successfully lobby the organs of state power to make sure that they're getting their meal ticket, why, other than the fact that they're more commonly dressed the same, should we only notice that they're doing that, and not that any number of other groups are doing that? And I think an especially fair comparison to make is, what about academics, right? Now, again, we said the military service issue is separate. So saying you shouldn't have to serve in the military and also get some benefits, I know that makes the pinch especially sharp, when people are looking at and critiquing Haredi society. But we've already said that there is, the issue of who's refusing to serve and why, that can be discussed on its own terms, and it's not necessarily clear that there's such a good argument for why a whole sector of society should just be able to say, we don't have to defend the society because we want to study Torah. They're not saying we're all afraid. I'm sure there are fearful secular people and brave secular people. There are fearful Haredim and brave Haredim, and the brave Haredim, it would seem, don't have a leg to stand on, saying that they shouldn't have to serve. And so some of them do, but probably not enough of them do. But if we leave that issue aside, and now we compare the yeshivas, let's say, that maybe benefit from some government funding, to many other kinds of educational institutions in Israel that get tax money, but especially universities. Like, let's take Har Tzofim, the campus of Hebrew University, which, being the sort of humanities and social science campus of Hebrew University, is packed to the gills with acolytes of a different ideology than Judaism, but which is, for many of these people, like a religion, where it has much more to do with the zeal of those who are most extremely opposed to judicial reform, where they devote their lives to a kind of scholarly study that demonstrably, for many of these scholars, is really hewing in the direction of fundamentally undermining the foundations of the Jewishness of the state of Israel, and many other things like that, the security of the state of Israel. You have a whole lot of academics on that campus that might fit that description. And more generally, you have, in any case, people who are being paid by the state to be scholars of some kind. So even giving them a benefit of the doubt and saying, okay, maybe some of them are doing something interesting, something useful. The state is paying them to study stuff. So when it comes to universities, we don't look at universities and say, this is an outrage. Why is all this tax money being spent on this scholarship, which, maybe is basic research, maybe is dubious direct value to the society? Why are you putting a gun to my head, taking my tax money away from me and giving it to this other guy so that he can study something that I don't care about, right? That question could easily be posed as well for a university in the state of Israel as for yeshivot, where, let's say, largely but not exclusively Haredim are perhaps receiving stipends to study Torah that somehow are funded partly by tax money. And then we could even ask how much money is being spent per scholar in the Haredi sector versus state money being spent in the university context. And I'm not saying this because we should get rid of all the universities. But it is a question to ask about socialism, because it doesn't often occur to people why it shouldn't be the case that there are more universities in Israel that are private. And obviously part of the reason for that is just the socialist history of the country that presumed at the outset that all good things going on in the society should be provided by the state after the state takes most of people's income and puts it together in a pot and then decides how to disperse it. So we have lots of state-funded universities with low tuition because the state is really subsidizing that. We also have farmers who are being subsidized, in many cases, to export crops to other countries, which is kind of a peculiar thing to be doing if you're receiving a government subsidy, and other things like that as well. So when you look from one end to the other of the socialistic system that has high taxation and then starts handing the money out and spending it in different ways, it becomes quite unfair to focus on Haredi society and say, oh, those parasites, those, as famously recently some TV personality put it, those, vampires or bloodsuckers or whatever, that's, it may be said hardly additionally derives from the sense, which is really not, again, a fair characterization across the board, but it is inspired by the behavior of some Haredim, that there is a sense that, oh, well, this is a sector of society that fundamentally doesn't even believe that there's some kind of special significance of the state. They feel like everyone else here is just goyim, and they just happen to be able to get more tax money from these goyim than they could get in Oklahoma, so they're living here. That's a stereotype with more than 0% accuracy, but certainly less than 100%. But even so, to say, oh, that sector of society that's on the dole somehow and getting a bunch of government money, that they're the ones who we really have to go after, we really have to mistrust and to indict and whatever, as in this campaign, which was talking about being free from their draft dodging. It's out of joint. It doesn't actually stand the test of scrutiny. This is a country where all sorts of money gets spent on all sorts of things after being taken away from people coercively by the socialist state. And for that reason, singling out Harediyut as though it's the one thing that we absolutely can't countenance spending that government money on, without asking what are all the other things it's being spent on and how much of that, and how much of that per person and all these other things, it's a distorted reality that really originates from an underlying hostility that has no basis in the mechanics of exactly who's getting what, but it's more like we were saying at the beginning, this campaign is really about saying, let's take the negative stereotype of a religious person you don't like, and let's foment more hatred towards those people, because that way you'll be more motivated to oppose judicial reform. That's what the ad campaign was clearly aiming to do. And so, it picked this issue, but when you dissect this issue, it really also exposes the nonsensicality and hypocrisy of this whole kind of argument. And that brings us back to the first point, which we can close on, this idea of being chofshi mikfiyat datit, free from religious coercion. I'm not going to let people tell me that I can't have my trains faster because no one's going to build train tracks on Shabbat. And I'm not going to let people tell me that I can't, bring my bread sandwich into a hospital during Pesach because the hospital is, keeping the laws of the Torah. So when such a person says this, I wonder if they're thinking about where the money that pays for the trains and the hospitals comes from. Because what I would venture to point out is that some of it, perhaps most of it, maybe in some cases all of it, is coming from tax money collected from the whole country, right? Because of the socialism, because of not kfiyah datit, but kfiyah mimshaltit, whatever you want to call it, government coercion that is common in a socialist society, you have a whole big portion of the economy being controlled by the government, or interfered with, or regulated, or influenced by the government, but even in some cases just provided by the government, especially with things like hospitals and things like railroads. And now it's a different kind of question, isn't it? Because now you're saying, okay, I want to forcibly take some of your income away from you, and I'm going to put it in a pot, and then I'm going to take that pot and I'm going to pay someone else to do work on Shabbat. So for me, as a Jew who wants to keep Shabbat, I don't have a desire to forcibly, to use state power to coerce other Jews to keep Shabbat against their will. That to me seems like the wrong way of making the case for the Torah. And I think it's both imprudent, and it may also be fundamentally against the Torah, at least insofar as the Torah does not envision using the mechanisms of a secular state to coerce people to not be secular. That is contradiction in terms. So like the situation that we're in currently with the state that we have and the way that it works, I think it's hard to make the argument that we should be using that state as a battering ram to force people to keep the Torah better against their will. However, once we start down the path of saying, oh, well, this state should do all sorts of other kinds of coercion, because coercion that redistributes wealth is good, for example, because that's socialism, or coercion that provides benefits to all that are paid for with tax money collected from rich people, that's good because that's socialism. And that kind of coercion is, Karl Marx taught us that that's absolutely the best kind of morality that, we can have, or what have you. I mean, that's caricature, but that this is the way that increasingly all Western liberal societies function, especially the European welfare states, but increasingly America as well. But if you come, as like say a more sort of American style libertarian, although it's a dying breed, and you say, you're taking my tax money and you're spending it on something that's against my religion, I don't want that to happen. That is a legitimate question to raise. And it's not because you're trying to coerce other people to not build trains on Shabbat because you want them to keep Shabbat. It's because you don't want your money being spent on Chilul Shabbat. Similarly with hospitals, right? Like, okay, fine, let's have private hospitals. If everyone's really willing to sign up, we can have private hospitals. And if someone wants to go to a private hospital that promises its customers that they will not keep Pesach, that would sadden me in a Jewish country. But at this stage in our nation's historical development, it may be a bridge too far to say, that can't exist. Yeah, it's so fine, it can exist. Let it exist, and then we'll, work on persuading our friends and neighbors and members of our nation and brothers and sisters through love and through showing them by example what the Torah looks like. But if you're going to say, no, the hospital is going to be built with money that we take from you by force, then the idea of saying, no, but you can't vote to say that you want the hospital to be a place that keeps Pesach, we've already blurred the lines here in terms of what is kfiyah datit and what is just a downstream consequence of the kfiyah sozialistit that everyone accepts and is used to, although maybe they shouldn't accept and shouldn't be used to. And that really, I think, is at the core of everything that we've been talking about at some level. The fundamental problem with this whole debate is that almost no one here is arguing on either side that we should be trying to reduce the power of the government. This is just a tug of war over which political movement gets to use the excessive power of the government to do things that they want. Perhaps that may point to a way out of this to some degree, although it's an unlikely one to be championed by many. because of the affinity that many have for socialism and all, the ways that they are inured to its coercion, it may be that you could get more people to agree, why don't we make the state less powerful? So not just the Supreme Court, but also the Knesset. Let's worry about putting more power and choice back into the hands of people who can freely choose to do things like worship on Har Bayit if they want, and like go to a private hospital that has whatever kinds of perks or benefits or drawbacks that they want, instead of saying, this is what the system in its wisdom is offering you, and you get what you get and you don't get upset. Because the moment that that's the ethos, then it does seem much more zero-sum to people. And they'd say, look, if the power of such a state is democratically delivered into the hands of people who want to keep the Torah, how can I be protected from the coercion that will result? It'll express the preferences of people who want to keep the Torah, and the state is highly coercive, and of course that's going to impinge on me. So, perhaps we can acknowledge at some level that the fear of religious coercion is not totally unfounded, but it's founded in the comfort people have here in general with state coercion, which is absolutely the core of the ethos of the overly strong Supreme Court, that people championing, these banners are typically in favor of. And so in the end, I would propose that there are many kinds of alternative banners that we could try to compose in opposition to these, that we want to be an Am Chofshi Mikfiyah Zarit, because we want to be free from foreign coercion, since the Supreme Court really is a way for other governments to impose their will on this country undemocratically. And we want to be Am Chofshi Mi Elohim Nochrim. We want to be a nation free from alien gods, because at the end of the day also, we came here to be a nation that could serve Hashem and not be subject to and in service to the standards and idols of other nations, and the style of systems of governments of other nations, etc. And so we also want to be an Am Chofshi Mi Avdut. We want to be free from the slavery that we were delivered from by the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so we may not be there yet, but if we understand the thrust of this campaign that seeks to divide us and analyze it in this way, it may light the way to a resolution where we say we want a society where all of us are free to persuade each other and free to make more choices for ourselves and for our families, free to keep the Torah if that's what we want to do, and ultimately, given enough time, B'ezrat Hashem, I think we'll get to the right place together.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.